I did my first triathlon about 6 years ago, and since then I've done a few. Okay, in honesty, they're not all mine. Some of them are my wife's too. But it's fair to say that I've done a reasonable amount of triathlons. I can confidently say that over my time doing triathlons, I have made all of these mistakes that I'm going to talk about in one form or another. And I would love you to learn from my experiences and not make the same blunders that I did. Because while some of them were just a bit annoying or even amusing, some of them were actually quite significant, and if you can avoid them, then that's definitely worth it. And if you're new here, then hey, my name is James, and I'm a registered sport and exercise nutritionist. I work with amateur and professional endurance athletes to help them train and race better, improve their recovery, and do all of this in a healthy fashion. Triathlons are so much fun, and the community is a wonderful, welcoming bunch. One of the things that I look back on with fond memories of the newbie that I used to be is hearing people in transition flapping and stressing about all manner of things. If you're totally new to triathlon, by the way, transition is the area where only competitors are allowed, and that's where all of your kit is, like your bike and your wetsuit. I hear them worry and stress, and I think, that used to be me. It's kind of nostalgic. Whereas nowadays, I really just race for the fun of it, and it is way less stressful. And actually, this is a great place to start. And this first one is about forgetting to actually enjoy your triathlon. It's so easy to get fixated on the hard training sessions, the stress of the race, and before you know it, you're over the line and you realize that you didn't enjoy any of it, and you didn't take any of it in. Focus on the fun rather than anything else. If you want to take it seriously in the future, then fair enough. But especially if you're a beginner, just enjoy the experience and enjoy the day. Now, this is something one of my newsletter readers, Ben, said. The only thing I regret a bit is not enjoying the event a bit more. I was stressed about getting everything right and forgot to have a blast. So for all first timers, the effort is done, you got your training sessions in, enjoy it. One of the things which is really worth doing is making sure that you've got enough time to get all of your kit and transition ready, and then just taking a moment to yourself to reflect, enjoy where you are, and try and soak in some of the atmosphere. Triathlons are often in amazing places as well, with beautiful lakes and normally an early morning start, and it can be so wonderful. So just trying to give yourself a moment to actually take that in is definitely worth it. Another thing which I really like to do and would highly recommend it is saying thank you and smiling to as many people as you can and passing on words of encouragement. You'd be surprised at just how awesome this feels, and supporters and marshals will always be pleased as well. Most triathletes love data, even beginners, and actually perhaps even more so. I remember very clearly a triathlon where I had just finished the swim, got to my bike, took my helmet off to put it on, and realized that my Wahoo, so my bike computer, wasn't turned on. So I had to turn it on there and just wait for it to wake up. This was super frustrating and just time and stress having to faff around with kit when I should have just had it prepared. Nowadays, I turn it on before the swim, and I put the standby time to around 2 hours, so it's just not going to be an issue. And if you have a Garmin, then they usually have race day mode, which means that it won't auto switch off, and you can select that. If you're getting into triathlon a bit more seriously, or even if you're a beginner and you know you have a pacing plan or something that you want to stick to, it can be super helpful to have a bike computer. But also, if you don't have a bike computer, don't worry. It's absolutely not necessary. It's just a nice to have, especially if it's your first triathlon. Don't worry about getting one. Just try and enjoy the bike leg without worrying too much about anything like your pace. There are 3 classic problems that I see with triathletes when it comes to their breakfast before a triathlon. That's eating too much, too little, and the wrong type of food. The main aim of breakfast is a little bit different to what people actually think, because all you really want it to do is make you feel good and satisfied and just give your carbohydrate stores a little bit of a top up. It's not actually to power you through your triathlon, because most of that energy is going to come from the food that you've eaten in the days before your race, as well as any nutrition that you consume during your race. I always recommend practicing your intended race day breakfast before your actual event, especially before a running session. This just means you can check to make sure that you tolerate it okay and that you don't get any unpleasant symptoms. Now, there is not a perfect breakfast that fits everyone, but instead there is a perfect breakfast for you, which you can find by following general guidelines. It should contain lots of carbohydrates, and generally the simpler the better. So for example, white toast over brown toast. And it should be low in fiber, fat, and protein, because those nutrients are harder and take longer to digest and are more likely to still be in your tummy when you're racing, which is more likely to give you tummy problems during your event and especially during the run. So breakfast should just make you feel satisfied but not over full. Now, these are all good examples of what you might eat before racing. And honestly, you can just pick one that suits you best and that you think that you're going to be able to stomach early in the morning before your race. I would always recommend having your breakfast at least 2 hours before your race, ideally somewhere around the 3 to 4 hour mark. But it does depend on what you're like. For example, I have a very sensitive stomach and have to make sure I eat well in advance. Now, I mentioned the word transition earlier, and for a lot of beginner triathletes, transition can be super scary and stressful. There's the rush of trying to get everything done. Your wetsuit off, your bike helmet on, your shoes on. There's everyone all around you. It feels a bit chaotic, and then it's go, go, go. Having a smooth, easy transition can save you a lot of time, but that's not actually the reason why I would recommend practicing it. Really, what I would suggest is practicing your transitions just to get comfortable with it. Learn how to use your kit, how to take something on and off, because it reduces the stress and the pressure on race day. It's really helpful to realize that you can actually slow down and take your time, because it really doesn't matter, especially if it's your first or your first couple of triathlons. With my first triathlon, which was a 70.3, I very clearly remember that my bike was next to the fence, so kind of where spectators could go. And my mate was standing there and he had come to support me. So I chatted to him while I was getting out of my wetsuit and getting all of my bike gear ready. And then the second time round, so in T2, transition 2, from bike to swim, my mum was there. I chatted to her, I put some sun cream on, I had a gel and just thought, okay, I think I've got everything, let's go. Sure, it added some extra time, but I really didn't care because I wanted to make sure that I didn't feel super stressed and that I had remembered everything. So practice how you're going to lay your kit out, what order you might do something in, and try and get a bit of muscle memory with it. What I tend to do is in the final section of the swim, I start running through that in my head. So I'm thinking, okay, I get out the water, I take my hat off, I put my goggles inside my hat. Then I'm going to take off my wetsuit, the arm holding the goggles and the hat first, and pull the wetsuit sleeve over so it's in there. Then I'm going to start running through the next things that I need to do. It's really helpful to just have that list and visualize it because it will make it so much less stressful on race day for you. When you're a beginner, it makes sense to try and minimize the amount of things you have to faff with during your race. And one of those things is tying your shoelaces. You can use elastic laces for your running shoes, and it makes things so much easier. It means you don't have to spend the time trying to do your laces up, which can be important, especially if you have cold hands, and it's so much easier to get shoes with elastic laces on with sweaty feet. Now, of course, you don't have to do this. You can get by with just normal laces, and if you want to do that, it's fine. It's just this is a super helpful tip that you will find useful on race day. Now, if you're interested, I've actually created a race day list for you, and you can download this with a link in the comments and description section of this video. It's a list of all the things that you might need for racing, and is what I use before my triathlons to help remember that I've packed it all. I can tick them off as I go. So you can download that for free and use it in your next triathlon. In my early triathlon days, I used to have the mindset of more is better, and I would often continue to train up to or just before the day of my triathlon. But actually, I know now how important it is to taper, because it'll improve my performance on race day, which will then make me feel better because I've got more out of myself. Now, if you're not sure what tapering is, it means reducing either the volume and or the intensity of your training sessions before your race to make sure that you're fully recovered and you're ready to go for your triathlon. The opposite just isn't worth it for most people. It increases the risk of overtraining, it increases the risk of getting injured, and there's a chance that your race just doesn't go as you planned it to, just because you continue training. And if we're getting into the nutrition nerd aspect, it's also important from a carbohydrate loading point of view. And that's because damaged muscles, and you damage your muscles when you do hard training, by the way, don't store glycogen as well as fully healed, ready muscles. Now, glycogen is the term for your body's stored form of carbohydrates, and it's essential to have those at full capacity before you race. So doing hard training actually impairs this, so it's another reason not to do it. If my race is on a Sunday, I'll have my last full training session on the Wednesday, although I typically won't go quite as hard as I usually would. And then I continue to train, but just at a lower volume and lower intensity than I normally would. And I'm always really conscious of this now, just because I know how important it is. And that, as I mentioned, I really want to get my best on race day, and this is the way to do it. My first 70.3 didn't go quite to plan. I mean, it wasn't awful, and I still mostly enjoyed it, but the run really wasn't great. I bonked hard during the run, and bonking means running out of your carbohydrate stores, and it meant that there was a lot of walking and questioning why I had decided to do it in the first place. Fast forward to having a master's in sports nutrition and working with triathletes, and I know how important nutrition is and how important it is to practice. I try to encourage triathletes to start practicing their exact race nutrition about 6 weeks out from their race, because this gives them time to test, make changes if needed, and just get comfortable with using their nutrition and everything around it. Don't leave it till the last minute to practice your race nutrition, because it will make you feel way more stressful and it's more likely to cause unpleasant upset during your race. I have done loads of videos on this, and I'll link you to those at the end of this one. Now, regardless of how much I say, make sure you enjoy the day, don't rush, don't stress. I can be 99% sure that you will be super excited, you'll feel loads of adrenaline, and you'll go out way too hard. I still do this now, and mostly because I think I'm fitter than I really am, but it causes problems, and most triathletes go out too hard in each of their disciplines at the start. Now, I would recommend trying to avoid this mistake of going out too hard for two main reasons. The first is from a more physical point of view, and in short, if you go out harder than you can sustain, you're going to have to slow down. You'll build up lots of waste products in your muscles, they'll start to feel burning and heavy, and it means that the end part of your race is much more likely to be slower, and you're going to find it really difficult to maintain your pace. But if you slow it down and try and build into it, then you'll find it much more sustainable and is way more enjoyable. And this is the second reason, is that mentally, it feels so much better to finish a triathlon feeling strong and like you've given it everything, rather than just limping across the finish line. So I always try to recommend starting slower than you think you need to and building into it, because you're much more likely to find your own level that you can maintain if you do it that way. If it helps, set pace targets on your watch or your bike computer that are purposefully slower than you think you want to go, and then you can use that and build from there. The first time I ever did a proper open water swim was doing the swim part of a relay triathlon. I was in a lake and I was wearing someone else's wetsuit that I had never worn before. Oh, and I was not a particularly experienced swimmer. Yeah, you can guess, it kinda didn't go that well. Open water swimming is a completely different experience to pool swimming, even if you're an experienced pool swimmer and you've done a lot of it. I would really recommend that you practice some open water swimming before your event. Especially if it's a mass start, it can feel pretty overwhelming. There'll be lots of people around, there'll be lots of noise, you might not be able to see properly because the lakes are often dark, you're trying to sight, look where you're going. It's a lot to take in and it's a bit of a sensory overload. But by practicing, you reduce some of this and it will feel much more tolerable on race day. And if it's possible, try and practice where you're actually going to be doing your race, because it will just make you feel way more comfortable with your surroundings. Try and build in some regular sessions, and if possible, swim with others just to mimic that sensation of swimming next to people and see how it makes you feel. Now, a bonus tip, so the tip within this tip, is to use mirrored goggles if you can. It can make a massive difference to seeing where you're going, especially as the swim is usually quite early in the morning, where the sun is quite low, more likely to be in your eyes and reflecting, and these mirrored goggles can just make it so much better. Then you could take your mirrored goggles and normal goggles with you on the day and just decide depending on the conditions. Now there's a saying to control the controllables, and this is very apt when it comes to triathlon. You can control your nutrition, you can practice transition, you can really take your time to do these things before the race and nail your strategies. But some things are out of control, like the weather, but you can still manage this. Look at the forecast before your race in advance and pack kit that you think you might want to use, accounting for things like wind and rain. Don't worry if it's not the fanciest, best looking, or best fitting gear. I can promise you, if you have it and need it on race day, you will be so glad that you packed it. So for example, packing gloves, or waterproof or a warm jacket to use on the bike is going to be really beneficial if it ends up being super cold or rainy and you know you're going to be out there for a while. The benefit you're going to get from that is huge, and it's just going to contribute to you enjoying the event so much more. Now, if you're interested in some of the nutrition aspects of triathlon, I've put a couple of videos up on the screen now which you might enjoy watching.